This is MakerGalaxy.
We're always talking about the future of design, the future of technology, the future of making. In a world where makeup can be customized and 3D printed in a user's home. A world where umbrellas can be used as a crowdsourcing tool for real-time weather data. How do we find the next big thing? MakerGalaxy is a show that explores the crossroads of design, technology, and the future of making. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Simon Martin, and this week we talked with designer, author, and all-around cool gal, Carla Diana, author of the popular children's book, Leo, the Maker Prince. Leo is a book that teaches both kids and their parents how 3D printing works, while also allowing them to 3D print the characters at home. We'll talk with Carla about everything from how she got her start in product design with a background in mechanical engineering to how Leo the Maker Prince came to be and more. Today's episode is brought to you by the new Objet 500 Connects 3 from Stratasys, the world's only color and multi-material 3D printer. Offering incomparably brilliant and consistent colors, plus transparent colors, the Objet 500 Connects 3 lets you create the most true-to-life modeling possible. Find out more at stratasys.com. Welcome, Carla. We'll get into Leo the Maker Prince in a little bit, but before we do, we want to know. You live in New York City. Where can we find the best oysters in New York City?
Well, I really like oysters, and the best spot would be the Oyster Bar in Grand Central Station. Because not only does it have really yummy fresh food, but it's also a really classic spot with an amazing interior.
Oh yeah, love that place. Love that place. So Carla, let's start from the beginning. Who are you and where did you come from? Have you always been a New Yorker?
So yes, I've always been a New Yorker. I was born in the Bronx. And I went to high school and college in Manhattan.
Awesome.
And I studied mechanical engineering because I knew that I wanted to make products. But I didn't know that industrial design existed and that you would get paid to make drawings and play with models and things like that. So I went back to school, and since then I have been working as a product designer on everything from vacuum cleaners to cameras to dishwashers and appliances.
Okay. So let's back up a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your earlier interests in engineering and design. I mean, at one point, did you realize that you were a designer engineer type?
Yeah. So from a very early age, even in high school, I realized that I really loved math and I really loved building things and taking things apart. And I also really liked art and some of the more creative things. But I saw engineering as a way to creatively apply math. So I studied mechanical engineering.
And so then you attended Cooper Union in New York's East Village, which I coincidentally live a few blocks away and love walking by every day. So you went there for a mechanical engineering degree, and I find Cooper Union to be an extremely fascinating school in regards to their offering of mechanical engineering, because they have such a solid foundation in appreciating the value of aesthetics. How would you say this aesthetic value that Cooper Union places on their programs helped shape such a function-based program like mechanical engineering?
Well, from my experience, what was really fascinating about Cooper Union is it's a pretty small school. They have about, between 1,000 and 2,000 students. And it's only art, architecture, and engineering.
Right.
So really everyone who goes to school there is, I guess, what we would call now a maker of some sort. And so even though I was studying mechanical engineering, I was able to go to the other building across the street and take classes in sculpture, for example, and drawing. And I, really worked hard to put that into my curriculum. So
it was almost more of an industrial design kind of education, would you say, compared to, what a mechanical engineering program might be at another school? Or
I mean, I kind of made my own because I knew that I wanted to be an industrial designer. I didn't know that industrial design existed until about my junior year when I came across a magazine that doesn't exist anymore. It's called ID, or Industrial Design Magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
I missed that one.
Yeah, that was a beautiful magazine. It was really inspirational. But I was, a junior, so I was 3 years into an engineering degree. So I finished my engineering degree. And Cooper Union actually didn't offer an industrial design per se, but that's why I was going ahead and taking some of these other classes.
So, and then after Cooper Union, how did you set out on your career path as a product designer?
Well, I had some really interesting experiences. I mean, one of the jobs that I got that required a mechanical engineering degree was a really funny job at a place called the Good Housekeeping Research Institute. And it is a lab that's connected with the magazine, Good Housekeeping Magazine, that many of our moms got, right?
Right.
And, what was interesting about that is that even though I wasn't designing products, what I would do is I would put together buyer's guides on different products. So I managed to really understand and study the way things work and what standards they have to meet and what features different products have. Like I would do a review of, let's say, bathroom scales, and I would get every single bathroom scale on the market into our lab, and we would take it apart, and we would study the different technologies, and then I would write a buyer's guide or go on TV and do a review of what we had studied. So that was kind of an odd job. But I did know that I wanted to be a designer at that point. So I went back to school to a place called Cranbrook Academy of Art, which is not in New York. So I left my beloved home city and I went to Michigan. I went to suburban Detroit. And Cranbrook's a really, really interesting school in that it is very focused on concepts and, and future thinking. So that was really exciting. And I studied what they call 3D design, which is their version of industrial design. And it's a very inspirational place. Many designers are familiar with Charles and Ray Eames, who had designed a lot of the furniture in the mid-century that
totally
inspires us. And they went to Cranbrook and had taught there. And a lot of very famous sculptors like Harry Bertoya and the Saranins. And so there was a rich legacy of innovative designers,
icons
that had come through Cranbrook. Yeah, exactly. So, I really loved it.
Okay, so from there, you started working at some other design firms?
Yeah. So from there, it was right about the .com era. I had graduated in 2000, and I first had worked as a summer designer for Karim Rashid.
Okay.
Who is a very well-known industrial designer here in New York also.
And he just released a very excellent pop album, might I say.
Oh, yes. He did. He did.
So
yes, I worked for him.
So what was that like?
It was awesome. I mean, at the time that I worked for him, it's very interesting because in 1999, the office was not more than 6 people, including him. And it was actually, his apartment was in the back and the studio was in the front. And every day we were getting calls from someone who was interested in his work. And, we got some phenomenal experience and we got to see his process. from the moment of the first phone call to the sketches to the prototypes that were coming back from the client's factory. And he was involved in both product design, like the very iconic Garbo garbage can was already done at that point, and the O chair was just completing development. And it was incredibly fast-paced, and it was a tremendous amount of learning. And
I understand you won't be able to dive into too much detail here, but is there something uniquely interesting you could tell us about his design process, or something you were involved with that might not be a very traditional method?
Yeah. So actually, I would say one of the most formative things about working at Karim's office at that time is that he was working with a client called Nambe. And Nambe was traditionally, they make metal bowls and sometimes crystal and other things that are sold at Macy's. They're very popular wedding gifts. I mean, they're just very beautiful, high-end sculptural bowls. And he convinced them to invest in a computer numerically controlled machine, a CNC machine, in order to actually randomize some of the cuts. So if you can imagine like a bud vase that is cut at an angle at the top or cut in a curve, and you could randomize that so that at the store, each one looks slightly different.
Interesting.
And and then we also use that method to etch patterns in the surface of different bowls and vases. And it really stuck with me, this idea of the designer using technology in order to really create a new experience for the customer.
Is that kind of what inspired you to pursue robotics and interaction design later on?
I think actually, what inspired me, I don't think it was entirely that, although that really inspired me to think that a designer can use technology in his or her work in a creative way. I had also, like I was starting to say, it was the .com era. So I started bringing back a lot of my computer programming skills that I had. When you go to engineering school, you have to do computer programming.
Yeah.
Like I had learned several programming languages. We all had to use Fortran in our assignments. And so when I got to design school, there was a time where there was a tool called Director that Macromedia was making that would allow you to use computer programming and manipulate things on the screen or do installations. So I was doing a lot of interactive installations where I would have a sensor that would go in. It would affect something on a projection. And at the time, all of the jobs were in doing web stuff and websites. So I spent a little bit of time as a creative director for a kids software project that was called Planet II that would teach kids math through this on-screen interface that was kind of like a 3D environment, and the kids would be these avatars. I really loved using computer programming in my work in a really intensive way. But I knew that I would always go back to making physical things and that I would kind of bring both things together at some point.
Okay, so you have this background that is completely wide. You've worked with software, you've worked with product design, you've worked with various mechanical engineering disciplines. So how did all of this lead into Leo? For those listening who might not know, who is Leo the Maker Prince and how did he come to be?
Okay, yes. So Leo the Maker Prince is the title of a book that I've just written and it's published by Make. And it is the story of a young woman who meets a 3D printing robot whose name is Leo. So Leo is actually a robot. And the story is crafted so that it teaches the reader what 3D printing technology is, but in a really sort of fun and friendly way. And then throughout the book, there are a number of objects that can be downloaded and 3D printed. So as you're reading the book, when you see something like there's a sheet that features very prominently, you can go to a URL and you can download it and you can make the sheet.
This is essentially an entire ecosystem that you've created and is revolutionary in the fact that instead of going to the toy store to buy, Harry Potter action figures, the readers can literally create their own action figures at home.
Exactly. And it's been very exciting because now I get pictures from people all over the world who have downloaded and printed the objects. Sometimes they change them or they change the color. So I'm having a lot of fun connecting with readers.
You've essentially created a tutorial of sorts with a strong narrative that both kids and their parents can learn all about 3D printing from. So do you remember your aha moment when you knew that you were going to bring Leo to life? I mean, how did all these little factors just kind of come together?
I was very excited about the desktop 3D printing movement. I had used high-end 3D printers in my work as a professional designer, and they were always like really expensive, and you only did them for very special things. And when the MakerBot and all the other desktop 3D printers started coming out on the scene and being, I realized they were going to be available for people and the price was going to drop. I really wanted to do a project that was about that. And I thought I would write maybe a serious book, describing what this was and how 3D printing works. And the place where I went to high school, which is also here in New York, is actually a girls' school called Marymount, and they called me up and said, we'd like you to consult with us because we're thinking about putting in a fab lab. And a fab lab is essentially a fabrication lab where you have computers as well as equipment that can make physical things like 3D printers and laser cutters.
Totally.
And and I went there and they put the fab lab in and I visited the girls and I, could see this excitement in kids' faces. And I could also see that, the aha moment was when I started doing research, talking to experts. So I called up people from Cornell University. I called up people from MakerBot and I asked them, what will we be doing with 3D printing? And the message that I kept getting was, we know 3D printing is in our future, but we're not really sure. We have these guesses that, maybe everyone has them in their home or maybe they're in a store and you go to them and maybe people will see 3D printing food, but we don't really know, and that's kind of exciting. So I thought to myself, well, if this isn't really like expertise to be known, it's really just kind of guesses, wouldn't it be a lot more fun to tell the story of the future, of the possibilities, to the kids who are going to be grown-ups in that future?
Definitely.
And, so that was really the moment.
And so, I guess a part of that has to do with the rise of STEM education and, as you mentioned, 3D printers being added to K through 12 classrooms around the world on a weekly basis, if not daily. Mm-hmm. So how did you pinpoint exactly which age group this would appeal to, or was it a crapshoot, so to speak?
It was kind of a crapshoot. I recognize that though I do many things, writing a children's book is something I have never done. So I hired a friend of mine who has a lot of experience in children's theater and asked her to be my story editor. Her name is Cindy Hansen. And so what I did is I wrote the story out the way that I envisioned it, and then Cindy and I went back and forth and we really crafted things. And realized that an ideal target would be anywhere, 8 or 9 years old would be an ideal target. That's when kids are starting to really
use CAD
use
and
new technologies. Yeah. And so we did a range of around there from 7 to 11 or 12.
In terms of when you were developing it, did the characters come to mind first, or did the narrative come to mind first in terms of, who would be telling the story? Because, it really is also a design project. These are physical products that are the characters. They're not illustrations. They are illustrations, but they're products too. So did one come before the other, or?
Yeah. So, in terms of the process for developing the whole Leo the Maker Prince book, the main characters it's really autobiographical. So there is a main character named Carla who meets the 3D printer named Leo. And I like to personify all my robots and things. So even though I have never used a walking, talking 3D printer, I have used 3D printers. So Carla and Leo are the main characters, and that's very autobiographical with my excitement and my experience with 3D printing. And then from there was a big strategy that I worked on with my team. I also had an assistant, and I had an editor with Make, Brian Jepson, and I laid out all of the different possible futures, and then what kind of object would be good to illustrate that future. For example, one of the possible futures is that every 3D printer would have a scanner and would be able to make things custom for you to fit your body. So there is a character in the book whose name is Nathan, and he lives by the beach, and he uses the 3D printer who scans his foot to make these special kind of beach sandals that leave fun footprints. So the Nathan character was born from the need to showcase scanning capabilities.
Interesting. So you associated various technologies with individual characters to tie everything together as one movement.
Right, exactly. So there were 7 possible futures. One is 3D printed food. One is the scanning and customization. One is like what we call a micro factory, or a jewelry designer who makes multiples and sells them. And so for each of those scenarios, there emerged a case study, and then the character emerged from that.
There's obviously a huge amount of supporters for the 3D printing, but there's also people who are calling it all hype. What would you say about that argument? Obviously people can make stuff, but it's also a limited technology. So what would you say to the people who think it's all hype, or do you also think it's a little bit of hype?
Yeah, so I think about this a lot, and I do not think that it's hype at all. I think that we are going to see 3D printing in so many different areas. Like there's a lot going on in, let's say, just medicine alone, between prosthetics and people who are actually experimenting with 3D printing organs and things like that, to people who are using it as the kind of micro factory. I think that we still don't actually know, but it's definitely not hype. And when I attend some of the maker events, like the Maker Fair, which just took place in the Bay Area last week, I just see an explosion of businesses. For example, there was a 3D printing shoe company that is, able to offer a custom shoe based on the scan of your foot. And I think that what's challenging is that the economics are still at a place where the cost is very high to make an individual piece. But I think, that stuff's going to come down.
Right.
And printers are going to become a lot faster. They're going to become a lot cheaper. And, I think that if you look back to a 2D printing, when 2D printing was first introduced, we may not have thought, why would we possibly need this? I'm not a person who makes brochures. And now we can't imagine a home without one.
To add to that, crowdfunding is obviously a hot topic with the 3D printing and maker movement right now. So did you ever consider the Kickstarter route to get Leo out there, or did you know all along that you wanted to go straight to a publisher?
I knew that I wanted to go to a publisher because it was my first book. And I felt like there was so many things about publishing a book that and getting distribution and all that kind of stuff. So I considered self-publishing, but I knew that if a publisher was interested, that I would learn a lot from that publisher and that it could be a really good relationship. And it's been very exciting for me to be involved with the Maker Media folks. So I was very lucky that they really loved this idea from the get-go.
Oh, I'm sure. And then you'll be talking about Leo at the upcoming Core 77 conference in New York this June, correct?
Yes, I will.
So what else can we expect to hear about from you there?
So at the Core 77 conference this June, I'm going to be talking about how storytelling can be a critical tool to making people feel an emotional connection to an object. I'm also going to be doing a little bit behind the scenes, kind of how the objects were designed and what tools I used and what process I used and how decisions were made.
Excellent. And what can we expect from Leo in the near future? Is there a sequel on the way by any chance?
Yes. So that's a great question. There is a sequel in the works, and the sequel is a little bit more about drawing and using CAD to create objects. So the first book really just introduces you to what 3D printing is and gives you some objects that you can download and print. But, I recognize that there's a big chasm between printing something that's already made and making something yourself.
Definitely.
So what I have the characters doing that I'm working on right now is that they talk about what a 3D file is when you're constructing a form and how you can draw in your Sketchpad in order to think about what you'll build in the software ahead of time.
What software are you expecting these kids to use? I mean, SolidWorks, Rhino, all this stuff is super complicated, and that's the stuff that makes real products. So is it going to be like Tinkercad, SketchUp? I mean, which CAD program do you think is the best for this generation? Yeah,
well, that's a great question, and that's something I'm trying to get my head around, and I'm in the midst of doing lots of research into that. I mean, what I'm hearing is, Tinkercad is definitely something that a lot of schools are using successfully. SketchUp is also out there, but I think that Autodesk is one of the companies that I'm paying a lot of attention to because they seem to be really trying to understand the space of the person who's never used 3D before. So their 123D suite of tools is also really interesting to me.
One last question for you, Carla. As an accomplished designer and author, what is one piece of advice you can give our listeners who want to really push that side project out there and just get things done, be it a book or a product design idea?
Right. I would say that drawing is magic. Being able to put your idea on paper as a drawing at first is just so super valuable to starting conversations with other people, getting feedback, and making you feel like you can go through a little bit of thought process in order to take you to the next step.
So you're just all about the ideation stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people have ideas and they talk about them a good deal, but because we're not always encouraged to draw, we draw when we're little kids, and then if you're not a professional designer, it's taken away from you. Or it's not really encouraged in schools, let's say. I think that it lets people think that they can't draw and then they don't capture their ideas. So I think, capturing the idea is just such a critical first step.
Well, I think that's a great answer. So, Carla, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, and we can't wait to see the next chapter of Leo.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Today's episode was brought to you by the new Objet 500 Connects 3 from Stratasys, the world's only color and multi-material 3D printer. Offering incomparably brilliant and consistent colors, plus transparent colors, the Objet 500 Connects 3 lets you create the most true-to-life modeling possible. Find out more at stratasys.com. Thanks for checking us out today, and if you'd like to find out more about Carla or Leo the Maker Prints, head over to Carla's website at carladiana.com. On our next episode, we'll be talking to the co-founders of the soon-to-be-launched musical accessory product design company, B&D Products. I'm your host, Simon Martin. Stay tuned and check in with us next week on MakerGalaxy.
A production of EVD Media.